Hey, have you ever heard the common half-truth that the church should not be political? I'm sure that you have. And I say it's a common half-truth because it's very hard to speak out on any of the moral issues of our day and not actually spill over into some form of politics or political action. Let's take the sanctity of life. Let's take the sanctity of marriage. Both of these are decisively biblical issues. And yet, if you stand in the pulpit and talk about these issues, you'll be accused by some of being political. Is it a bad thing to be political? Can we avoid being political? Is there such a thing as the non-political church if we are being a prophetic church? These are some of the issues we want to wrestle with today, especially as it's rooted all in that wonderful passage of Scripture, Romans 13, that often is used as a blanket for non-involvement and for being irrelevant as it relates to cultural issues. And so this podcast today is so critical because it is so relevant. We hope you'll tune in.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Are you guys ready for your weekly dose of political fun from Pastor Andrew and I? Because today is fun. We're dealing with probably one of the most frustrating excuses that I've run into as a pastor, and I'm sure you have as well as a pastor. Over and over again, we're talking about kind of the lies, the cultural lies that the German church swallowed during Hitler's rise to power, and making comparisons, if you haven't been with us, making comparisons to the church in America today. And we've talked about a number of those lies, but this one to me is like the most prevalent. This is on the lips of most pastors in America, and this chapter is entitled, "Be Ye Not Political." And wow, this is everywhere. It's a part of the American church today, and it was probably never more prominent, prevalent out there than during the last pandemic episode, right?
Yeah, and this is a label that I think people, it's been weaponized, so they kind of, it's like being a racist. Or whatever, right?
That is a really good point.
It's a label they just kind of slap on you, and once you're labeled, no one else even, no one's thinking more deeply about what that means. They just slap it on you, and they say, you're the political church, you're the political pastor, and all of a sudden you're put into a box. You know? Right. That's how our culture thinks.
Yep. And you know, it's interesting because I've seen this happen. If I make a statement on social media that addresses a candidate's unbiblical stance, or I speak out strongly on a social issue like the sanctity of life, if that messaging spreads wide enough, all right, and gets outside of my little Christian echo chamber, the number one thing I get back is, "Oh, if you want to talk about politics, you should have your 501c3 tax-exempt status taken away." In other words, as soon as you talk about politics, you're out of your lane, you're being political, and we're going to take away your exemption because that's not the role of the church. You're being political. I mean, it happens all the time. It just shows me people's blindness, their stupidity, their ignorance. And as you said, that was such a good phrase. It has absolutely become weaponized. The last thing some pastors want to be accused of is to be political. I mean, you'd rather be a bigot. You'd rather be anything than be labeled political.
I think the media has created such an emotion and such a layer upon like negative connotation to a political church that we no longer actually think deeply about what that term means, right? We just, it's like being a racist or a bigot. Like you just throw that, it's like the witch hunts in the past. You just throw that label on somebody, right? Right. Now they're a witch. Now they're all of a sudden they're on the defensive.
It's a verbal hand grenade, you know? And like you said, most of the time we don't ever stop to say, well, what does that really mean? Or to think deeply about the ramifications of your argument. Yeah. And so maybe that's a good place for us to jump into this chapter today. Metaxas starts off this chapter by quoting Romans chapter 13. And Romans chapter 13 has been used as the proof text that we can't do anything political. And even worse, it's one thing to just be passive. Even worse, it's been used as the justification that we need to submit and be complicit to whatever our government is doing or whatever any government is doing, because that's really what Romans 13 says is God has instituted governments, therefore it's our job to submit to them, period. Which again is a horrible interpretation and an even worse application of that verse. And he makes the point here, if any of the four errors, which he talks about in his book, but that we are discussing, could be most easily pushed to the fore in the Germany of the 1930s, it is the idea that Christians ought not to be political. We happily acknowledge, Metaxas writes, we happily acknowledge the truth that we Christians mustn't be overly political to the point where we put our hopes in politics and not in God himself. And so let's talk about that. He's basically saying, okay, we can also fall into the idol of being overly political and looking to Washington, D.C. to solve our problems. And there are Christians who do that. The bigger the government, the better the government, the more taxes we pay, the more redistribution of wealth through taxation. These are all good things because it's government job to create a level playing field, put a chicken in everybody's pot. There are those who really think if we can just get the right people elected or get the government machinery working properly, we're going to solve the world's problems. I can't help but think that maybe that wasn't the vision behind the United Nations. If we can get all the leaders of all the nations together in one room and get on the same page, we can actually create utopia here on planet Earth, right? And solve the problem. So I think this is a point that we need to talk about a little bit. And even as it relates to our own local church context, the last message we want to communicate is that if we just get good people elected into office, we'll solve all of our problems. Because, again, that makes an idol out of government, and government is not what we're looking to solve our problems. In fact, I love Ronald Reagan's famous quote, and I'm probably going to mess it up because I usually do, but the gist of it was, if somebody comes to your house and says, hey, I'm from the government, I'm here to solve all your problems, make sure you take off running the other direction because that's not good news. Government has a very narrow scope. An important scope, but a very narrow scope. And when we allow it to get bloated outside of that realm, we start really putting our confidence in an institution that becomes idolatrous.
Yeah, there are specific roles that's government's lane, and they should be very effective in those lanes, right?
Yep.
But there are many roles that's much more effective in other realms, like the family or the local church or a community center. And when the government veers from its supposed lane to other lanes, becomes less and less and less effective, eventually becomes the point of tyranny. And we have talked about this before. We believe in what the Bible says about human nature. So the concentration of power, concentration of wealth, concentration of authority, concentration of media or big corporation, whatever, and in collusion with government is not a good thing.
Yeah. It's just to get at, gosh, we talk about conservatism and all that, but really conservative ideas, if you trace them back, they come from Scripture. Like the idea of limited government, that tends to be a conservative value. Well, where did that come from? Well, it comes from the Bible. It comes from an understanding that a concentration of power, as you mentioned, usually leads to tyranny. And so we want limited government. We want local government. We want accountable government. And we want the rule of law. We want a constitutional government to keep people in their proper lanes. And we want checks and balances. So all of these ideas, though, are only necessary because we believe that human nature is fundamentally fallen.
Right.
If human nature is perfect, we wouldn't need separation of powers. But these are biblical ideas.
Then if human nature is perfect, we wouldn't even need the government.
Well, there you go.
So I think this is nuanced because when we say we won't limit the government, people will say, well, why are you guys trying to legislate about pro-life issues, right? Or the border issue. And then so like it seems like we're being hypocritical. We're talking on both sides of our mouth. But the truth is because there is a lane, there is a role for the government to defend life, to defend the innocent, right? To protect the border of a nation, to establish the border of a nation. There are proper roles for government. So it's nuanced, but again, because people don't consider these nuance and these specific lanes from a biblical worldview and really are sophisticated enough to process those things, all of a sudden we just get attacked. You're this and you're that, and just
bumper sticker slogans and so forth.
Exactly.
Eric Metaxas was mentored by Chuck Colson, who's now down with the Lord. And Chuck Colson used to have a saying that was so true. He said, Jesus is not returning on Air Force One. And what he meant by that is we need to stop looking for political solutions to really spiritual problems. And this is where the church comes in, because if the church doesn't step up and voice these things and lead and point people back to Christ, then we're going to, so here's an example. We just had, yesterday was election day. Usually those on the left spend all kinds of money, will use every single tactic possible, whether it's even moral or immoral, right or wrong. It doesn't matter. The goal is to win an election. Because for the left, if you don't believe in God, politics is your God, and power is the means to
end. Power is the end.
Yeah, power is the end.
Higher than power.
Whatever you can do to be in power, do it. And so that's why we're doing all kinds of crazy election stuff, ballot harvesting and all of this stuff. We won't allow people to simply be required to show an ID when they have to have an ID for 1,000 other things, and then we call that being racist or something. I mean, we go to no end to try to win an election, because for godless people, that is your savior. It's government. We on the conservative right, as Christians, sometimes we haven't figured out this game in terms of how to win, because for us, going out to vote is like a necessary inconvenience, like we're trying to raise our families, we're trying to work, we're serving at our church, and then I got to go vote. That's not the way the left deals with it. They make a total idol out of government, because that's their savior. So we're not saying that, and that's not the way we want to be, and that's not what the way we want to approach it. But Metaxas asked this question: where do we get the idea that it was possible to avoid being political at all? What's he trying to say there? I mean, he's basically saying nobody can go through life at any moment and not be at some level political, because political issues and politics is all around us.
Right. So where does that idea that thou shalt not be political come from? Where is the origin of that idea? Right? Exactly.
Yeah. And how is it even sensible? He goes back and he uses Wilberforce's time, and he says, if you were not speaking out about slavery, then you were not acting as a Christian at all, because to ignore that issue and to not speak out just because it was political would have been to completely miss out on the whole heart of Jesus and the gospel. So he's saying, of course you would have had to speak out, and at the point that you did speak out, you would have been being political, because that was a political issue. It was a moral issue, but it was being allowed by politics, by politicians, and it had to be stopped through politicians making that illegal and setting the slaves free. So he's saying, how, think about the social issues of our time. Like, how does a Christian go through life with the myriad of issues all around us that are now political and not speak out about them and thus be political at that point? I mean, you can't avoid it. I think that's Metaxas' point. You cannot avoid it. He says standing up for the unborn or any other persecuted group will mean being political in some way. And we just saw that big ballot initiative over in Ohio, which was so troubling, where basically now they've enshrined in their state constitution a whole host of evils that are moral evils and biblical issues, but they're all being put into the Constitution, which is political, basically enshrining a woman's right to an abortion throughout her entire pregnancy. It was a complete erosion of parental rights as it relates to stuff like gender confusion and those types of things. And there's all kinds of dark money that was pumped into that thing, all kinds of propaganda machinery that was set in motion, because this is a test state and a battleground state, and if they can make this happen in Ohio, they hope to spread that throughout the entire 50 states. So
did the ballot initiative pass?
The ballot initiative, I'm trying to think whether it was passed or defeated, which angle, but the bad guys won, all right?
Okay.
In other words, now in Ohio, it has been enshrined in the Constitution a woman's right to murder her baby. All throughout her pregnancy.
Wow.
And all kinds of crazy attacks on parental rights as it relates to gender confusion, transgenderism, those types of things, where parents can be punished for simply trying to be parents and for trying to raise their children and protect their kids.
So that kind of come under the radar a little bit, huh?
I guess on the national level, I mean, there's all kinds of national groups on both sides pouring money and trying to fight, because this issue is huge. Yeah. So here's my point again, too. I mean, what the Ohioans do not understand is that by enshrining that evil into their constitution, talk about bringing the judgment of God upon your state, and reaping the whirlwind of what's going to happen in that state as a result of promoting evil. But my point is that this was a massive political issue, and the church should have been leading the way, and maybe they were. I'm not judging the church in Ohio, but these are issues that if the church doesn't show up, evil gets enshrined in our Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how can you say, well, we're not supposed to be political, when all kinds of evil, biblical things that God calls evil and that we should be speaking out about are being put into motion. And for the church to somehow use Romans 13 as an excuse to sit back and do nothing while this happens, think about the children that are going to be destroyed, murdered. Think about the children that are going to be mutilated, their bodies mutilated, and live in pain the rest of their life because of the false lies about gender transition and all of that nonsense. So he says the church shouldn't be political. You need to be able to listen to that statement and hear the demonic undertones behind it, because it literally is the voice of the devil, and his goal is to silence and neutralize the church. But he gives us a little history lesson here, which I think is good. He was like, how did the church in Germany get to be where they were just so complicit with the overt evil that Hitler was perpetrating? And he takes us back to Luther's time and to something called the Peasant Revolt, which was in the 1520s. And just to backtrack, he says, Martin Luther got a lot of things right, but as any human being, he got some things wrong. And his views on the church and state would certainly fall into the latter category. Bonhoeffer once said that if the German church were to make an idol, it would be in the image of Martin Luther. So the German church obviously held Martin Luther in the highest place of honor and esteem, and of course, therefore, embraced his teachings. And so this is interesting, because in the Peasant Revolt, Luther came out with a writing called "Against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants." And in this article that he wrote, a treatise, Luther condemned the violence as the devil's work and called for the aristocrats to put down the rebels like mad dogs. Now, interesting enough, as I was doing a little bit of research on this, Zwingli, who was another reformer, landed on the other side and supported the peasants. Again, there was bloodshed taking place. A lot of the uprising was being done in the name of Luther, and I think Luther was trying to say, wait a minute, don't pin this on me. Right. I think it was a reaction, but his reaction, as I was studying this, his reaction is now highly criticized, because he almost did a political play. He kind of flip-flopped, and he actually advocated that the aristocrats squash the rebellion by any means possible, including, murdering the peasants. So, and his justification was Romans 13. So peasants, be good peasants, submit to your authorities. Who are you to revolt, kind of a thing. Yeah. And so you look at Luther's teaching here, him simply not denouncing the violence and being horrified from the violence and coming out strongly. In fact, Metaxas says too strong. He says Luther was mostly right, but his thinking in effect became part of the institutional thinking of the German Lutheran Church, so that when the brutal and decidedly anti-Christian Nazis claimed to be the, quote, governing authorities in Germany, the German church largely fell in line, as though standing against the wicked tyranny of Hitler was obviously and unavoidably wrong. So there has to be a theological justification, right, for why we do what we do. And for Christians especially, we're looking for, well, what does the Bible say? And for much of the German church, again, German Lutheran church, they looked back to Luther and to what he had to say, and especially took their notes from the Peasants' Revolt, and therefore revolting against leaders, even bad leaders like Hitler, is not the thing to do. And there are so many people. I've heard pastors say, "Well, look at Paul when he wrote to the church in Rome and commanded them just to obey their governing authorities. They were under evil emperors that were doing horrific things, and they were told not to be political and just to submit." And I'm thinking, what? That again, it's a misapplication. But it's used as a justification, even to the point where I can see these same pastors in America today giving the same argument over, whoever was the president or whatever the party was in rule. Just, hey, look, we need to honor and submit and go along and just keep having Bible studies at our church. Everything's going to turn out all right. In America today, he notes we are called white supremacists or Christian nationalists anytime we speak out, and that's that weaponization you were talking about. Right. No pastor, no respectable pastor wants to be called a white supremacist. We will bend over backwards to run away from being associated with any kind of racism, right? Or a Christian nationalist. We're one of those Bible-thumping, Trump-loving, MAGA-supporting, right. People or whatever. They jump to all kinds of conclusions about what we stand for, but they throw that like a verbal grenade at us, as if loving your nation and loving God, are wrong. But that's where we find ourselves today. He says there are currently a host of grave matters that require our attention, and for which we will certainly be attacked by secular and political foes as being political, and for which many within the church will attack us for not being focused on the gospel when we raise them. And let's talk about this for a little bit. One of those things is abortion, sanctity of life. Should the church be speaking out on abortion? I think that would be a yes.
Yeah, there's a clear biblical teaching on that issue.
But right. I have literally had pastors mention that they don't mention abortion or abortion policy or anything from the pulpit because it is political. And I'm thinking, how in the world can you not talk about abortion ever? Or I remember a few years back, a very famous college pastor in the Georgia area. He'd be a household name to many. He was actually
college coach, football coach, right?
No, he was actually a pastor,
okay.
But he had a big college ministry.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
National college ministry. Yeah. And somebody went back over a decade ago and found that he actually said something about homosexuality and quoted the Bible that suggested that it was wrong. And he was canceled from one of his college speaking engagements because they went back 15 years and found him actually talk about that issue. My question was, you had to go back 15 years when this is the issue? You had to go back 15 years to find he actually quoted the Bible on that? Right. But my point is, that's exactly what our enemies are looking to do. They will absolutely cancel you, shut you down, if you speak out on these issues and get out of your lane. How about the sanctity of marriage? How about simply speaking about sexual ethics? That sex should be reserved for the marriage covenant. I mean, you'll be laughed out of town if you say that on a public venue, because everybody knows sex is recreational. Sex has nothing to do with procreation. You can be whatever gender you want to be. You can have sex with whomever you want to be. The only magic word now in terms of sexual ethics is consent. So as long as people agree with whatever you want to do to them, then evidently that behavior is okay. We talked about the whole gender confusion and how God's clearly spoken about creating male and female, only two genders. But the question Metaxas asks is, hey, how many of you have pastors that have actually spoken or taught on these issues? And I'm glad to say I'm one who has. Mm-hmm. But every time you preach or teach on these things, you do take the risk of not only, you're going to offend the larger culture, but what you also have to watch is that you're going to step on some toes with Christian folks whose lives are being impacted. Either their children or somebody in their family has been impacted by these issues, and now it's become not theological, it's become personal. Right. And so these are really like landmines that you have to dance around to know how to address it properly in the right spirit and yet stay biblical and have the courage to speak it out. So again, Metaxas is saying these are gospel issues, and we should be speaking out on them. And as soon as we do, we have crossed over also into what has become the political realm. He says, speaking the truth of God for his purposes is simply our duty. It's not extra credit Christianity. It's basic Christianity. Actually, it's simply Christianity. I like that. This is not like the extra credit stuff. This is the gospel. It's speaking the whole counsel of God. And as pastors, you and I know we don't get the luxury of kind of picking and choosing which things we want to stand for. And just to add, he also mentioned something that, again, has become very fashionable today. There are certain causes that are also political, like sex trafficking. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. To stand against sex trafficking is cool, and it's in fashion. And again, I'm not minimizing the evils of sex trafficking. We must be speaking out against sex trafficking. But my point is, some pastors will throw something that direction in terms of speaking out against it, knowing that there's no risk at all and zero kickback. It is a safe issue. But even while they would say, well, don't be political, just preach the gospel, they would have no problem being political and evidently not preaching the gospel on that issue, because there's nothing to be lost by it. Yeah. And I think, again, it was Charles Finney who made the statement. He said, if we're not speaking out against the issues where the battle is raging the fiercest, then we're not being faithful to the gospel. In other words, okay, you can talk about that issue, but that's not probably the biggest issue in everybody's face that deserves our attention right now. There's a lot of other issues that you're conveniently skipped over to embrace something that's going to have very little kickback. Mm-hmm. So that is equally cowardly on our part, or all these social justice things. I was talking to a man who was sharing about a situation where they were trying to raise culturally sensitive vegetable gardens. And again, I have no understanding what that is, but trying to, if that's your preaching of the gospel and that's the battle line that you're drawing, that's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, I think about Wilberforce when you think about the time when he fought the slave trade for decades, right? And I mean, it was a fierce battle. It wasn't like just a campaign couple of years. I mean, he gave his life to it, and he got sick. I mean, he was getting all kind of attack. And you think back on his times, like now you think back on slave trade, you're like, what's the big deal? Everyone knows the slave trade is bad, but in his context, where he's at. My understanding, the slave trade was such a money driver. It impacts every part of society.
Well, and let's remind people, too, it was a global phenomenon. So it wasn't like this was unique to Britain.
Right.
Slavery was global. Every nation was practicing slavery.
Like some of the things we talk about today, whether it's abortion or whatever, is a global phenomenon, and there's big money tied in. It affects your neighbor. So when Wilberforce is talking about slave trade, he's talking about potentially his cousin's job, livelihood, because his cousin might not be in slave trade, but he's in some type of job that's associated with the slave trade, that's associated with slavery. I mean, he's touching on these issues that's integrated into society from the infrastructural basis, which I would say the same thing about these things.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to say, but now today, after the battles and after the victory, you look back, you're like, well, thank God that right now, as far as in our lives, there's no infrastructure of our society that's related to the slave trade. So it's easy for us to talk about that now, right? Right.
But the question is, if you're going to be consistent, there were pastors who I'm sure in Wilberforce's day said, hey, let's not be political.
Sure.
Let's just preach the gospel.
Because they're touching on people's, like you said, they might be talking about people's family, talking about their livelihood.
Well, yeah,
right?
Or you're looking out at your church congregation, and sitting out there is somebody who's your biggest tither, whose business is completely wrapped in the slave trade.
Yeah.
And so now your choice is, Do I really want to kick that hornet's
Yeah.
nest? Do I really want to please Jesus and preach the word, or do I want to just conveniently look over that part? Remember our illustration of just having everybody sing louder. Do we just want the church to sing louder while the Jews in the boxcars are going by screaming, "Help me, help me"?
Right.
Because God forbid we upset our own economic stream.
Right.
And Hitler recognized that for many of the pastors. He said, "You guys are just miserable little dogs. All you care about is your paltry little government subsidized salaries." Basically, they were willing to shut up and compromise the gospel, baptize it under Romans 13, stay non-political, just preach the gospel. But really what was the driving factor was economics. They didn't want their economic apple cart upset.
And today we are facing the same thing. I'm just making a parallel between today and Wilberforce time. What he faced and what we're facing is not so different.
Not at all. I mean, It's the same. And again, I found this to be true because I've crisscrossed the state. The pastors most likely to preach on these issues from the pulpit are not mega church pastors. They're very small to mid-sized churches because they have less to lose. The pastors at mega churches, they have a big machine that's running. There's lots of money required. There's lots of staff. They're living a comfortable life. They're making a nice income. And if they speak out strongly on some of these biblical issues, they will split that church right down the middle. So rather than split it down the middle where it needs to be split, right? If you're dropping the plumb line, split it down the middle and stand for truth. It's just easier to avoid it. But to avoid it, you have to come up with a justification. And again, what we're saying is the most common justification for doing nothing about the issues of our day is to quote Romans 13 and then roll over and go to bed, with a clean conscience. Sure. But it leads to death and destruction and tyranny for the next generation. Metaxas says, when Bonhoeffer said that God means the church to be the conscience of the state, he made it clear that the church must exist apart from the state and must be free to criticize the state if necessary. When the church shrinks from this duty to God and to its fellow citizens, it is not behaving as God's church. And when that happens, the state and everyone in it will suffer. So this is powerful. He's saying, there are three separate institutions created by God: the family, the church, and the state. And the role of the church is to be a prophetic voice to those in power. Our job is to speak into politics. Our job is to speak to those who are God's ministers in that arena, and to drop the plumb line of God's full counsel, and to do so unashamedly, and to do so boldly. And that if we fail to do our part, then the state's just going to run roughshod over people's lives and over all of our liberties. And we've seen that happen. So who have been the most powerful voices for reformation all throughout church history, or all throughout history? It has been church leaders. That's why we're talking about Luther. He was a powerful voice for Reformation. Calvin, Zwingli, you can go right down the list. These were the folks who understood their role. John the Baptist, to go all the way back to the Bible, speaking truth to power. Because again, as we've highlighted in this podcast, just because you're in government doesn't mean you're not under God. You're still submitted to God. Government exists because of God, and government rulers are accountable to God, and it's the job of the church to remind them of what some consider to be that unpleasant fact. He quotes here a famous passage, a great passage from Proverbs 24, verses 11 and 12, that we are to be a voice for the voiceless. And that when people are suffering injustice and they have no voice, and we know it, we know that it's happening, for us to remain silent brings condemnation and guilt upon ourselves. We must be a voice to the voiceless, and that's why the issue of abortion is huge, because I can't think of people who have less of a voice than an unborn child in its mother's womb. So, again, a powerful reminder of our prophetic role. He said, where is the caveat that we are not to do these things if someone deems them political? And I love this quote from Bonhoeffer. It is high time, he said, we broke with our theologically based restraint towards the state's actions, which he adds, after all, is only fear. Speak out for those who cannot speak. Who in the church today realizes that this is the very least of what the Bible requires of us? Some people look at, political engagement as icing on the cake. It's like, well, I'm not really called to that. And Metaxas, quoting Bonhoeffer here, says, no, that's the very minimum of the gospel, to speak out for those who are being victims of injustice. And if we can't do that, we're failing in our role as the church. And he hits the nail on the head here. He says, really, our theology is a cover for our fear. I mean, that's kind of a strong statement, but maybe we need to pause there. At the end of the day, is the reason really why we're not speaking out that we want to preach the pure gospel? Is it really that we don't want to be political? Or is it really that we're afraid that if we do, there might be consequences? Right. Starting with our own families and our own congregation, our own church family, and then moving out in ever widening circles, right? So this is Bonhoeffer challenging the German church, and again, I think we deal with some of the same issues today. And let's talk about this. He said maybe those outside the church could be the ones who wake up those within the church. Let's talk about this a little bit. Whenever we've done an event that centers around, for instance, freedom to not be forced to take a certain medical procedure, freedom to choose whether or not you want to wear a mask, freedom to choose whether or not you want to practice social distancing. I mean, we have all kinds of areas where our freedoms were tested. Whenever we spoke out on those things, it wasn't just Christian people that said, hey, thank you, Pastor Andrew, for speaking out. Mm-hmm. There were unchristian or non-Christian people who love freedom. They don't understand how to connect the dots yet. Or, I had a woman come up to me at our Harvest Festival, and she said, do you remember me? And I didn't at the time, but she said, I first met you when you were over at the rally over in St. John for students. And you were the only pastor that was there, and that so stuck out to me or impressed me that, well, why aren't more pastors here, that I wanted to come to the church and see who you were. And again, she wasn't a believer, but she was concerned about her kids. Mm-hmm. And so how many mama bears, because of what we're seeing happen with school boards and keeping parents hidden and taking away parental rights and doing all kinds of perverted things to our children without parents' knowledge or blessing, all these mama bears are rising up now and saying, over our dead body, are you going to do this to my kid? And again, these are not necessarily Christian people. They're just Americans who are fed up. Mm-hmm. And Bonhoeffer said, if I can't work with the church, maybe I can just work with some unsaved people who realize that, like, putting Jewish people in train cars and shipping them off to extermination camps to be slaughtered is probably not a good thing. Yeah,
starting World War II is probably not a good thing for Germany.
Yeah, or for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good point. If we are so theologically put in a coma by a misinterpretation of Scripture that gives us a get-out-of-jail-free card, and somehow we can wash our hands and stay out of the messy battles of our day, we're deceiving ourselves. And I like what he said. You know what? If I can't work with the church, then I'm going to find people that I can work with that share the same values, maybe are coming at it from a different starting point, but share the same values. And it was interesting, as we were talking about, he was even he tried to have a meeting with Gandhi because he was very interested in Gandhi's nonviolent, beatitude, Sermon on the Mount type approach to transformation and dealing with injustice. That meeting evidently never happened. And not that, Bonhoeffer and Gandhi would share the same theology. They don't. But Gandhi at least had the courage to stand up and to lead a movement against a very powerful government. Yeah. And so Bonhoeffer's, when it comes time to stand up for the cultural battles of our day and you're actually looking for courage, sometimes it's hard to find people. Yeah. And sometimes you'll find people that are more courageous who don't know Christ than people who do know Christ, which is a tragedy.
Well, I think sometimes maybe church folks are too sophisticated in our theology to somehow that sophistication cause us to disunite, cause us to divide, cause us. It's kind of what Chuck Colson said. We're too fussy with our theology to simply sign the Manhattan Declaration.
Right.
And
yeah. Wait. Can you just agree with me that the sanctity of life is a biblical value and that abortion is evil?
Yeah, but who else signed that?
Yeah. What do you mean by evil? I mean, we get into all, and usually when people ask like dumb questions like that, it's because they're looking for some theological, loophole. Yeah. That's why I can't associate with you, because we don't exactly agree with the meaning of sanctity or something ridiculous like that. We miss the elephant in the room because we're straining for these gnats. No, I think you're right. He said, some were risking their lives while others were simply attending conferences in the church. In other words, so here guys like him have stuck their neck out and they're resisting against the Nazi extremism, and they could lose their lives. And he's speaking at conferences trying to rally pastors who are just there to attend the conference. They have no plans on rolling up their sleeves and getting in the game. And he said it was so frustrating, because pastors sit around and they'll listen, and like you said, they'll talk theologically, while the boxcars of Jews just keep going off to the extermination camp. And he said it just even today, how many pastors are going to go sit at a end time prophecy conference and talk about whether or not so-and-so is the Antichrist or the mark of the beast or how fast we're going to go over the cliff, instead of just rolling up their sleeves and being a part of the Great Commission and planting trees and building schools for the next generation. We're all ready to go to prophecy conferences and check out. I mean, it gets to be very, very frustrating when we hide our paralysis behind, our theology. He says he was surrounded with patriots who were willing to stand even for Germany, but who did not know the Lord. And I'm saying this today. We've received a truckload of great patriots at Living Stones. What I have found is that some of the people that come to our patriotic meetings maybe don't know Jesus yet. And so one of the first things we do is say, look, our warfare is different from the warfare of others who don't know Christ. Let's introduce you to Christ, and then let's be Christians who also happen to be patriots. But hey, we'll take patriots anywhere they're found. We'll take people who will stand up for truth and righteousness and who love America and who may not know Christ yet. And we'll make sure that we share the gospel with them. But we can partner with those people on a lot of issues. Yeah. And we will. We'll continue to do that. He was talking about the powerful forces today. We got government, media, big tech, big pharma, who are all united to literally just squash the voices of any dissent. And I just met with a medical doctor who, again, incredibly brilliant, knows his stuff. And we were talking about the fact that if any of those doctors who tried to speak out and say, wait a minute, let's talk about this vaccine. There's some problems with this vaccine. Let's talk about this study. There's problems with this study. Let's talk about the FDA and what didn't go through the proper channels. Let's talk about big pharma. Let's follow the money. Anybody that challenged the status quo at the time, the power brokers, was an object of ridicule, attack, and their goal was to take away your license and basically destroy you. Yeah. So we need to understand, like, the other side plays dirty, and they're out to kill you. If not physically, they want to kill your livelihood and kill your future. So it takes courage. He brings out a really good point here. He says, truth is truth. There is no such thing as Christian truth. All truth is God's truth. This is so good. You don't put an adjective in front of the word truth and say, well, that's your guys' truth because you're Christians. That's what you believe. No, the gospel is true for everyone, whether you believe it or not. We should be focused on the pursuit of truth. Truth applies to every single person who's ever lived, no matter what culture, whatever background. That's the nature of objective truth. All truth is God's truth. And the failure of the church, Francis Schaeffer said, was to simply stand up for truth, and as truth with a capital T. And he said, even the unsaved, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, even the unsaved recognize truth when they see it. So It doesn't take a rocket scientist for someone to realize that murdering a baby, the right to murder a baby up through 9 months of pregnancy, is evil and wrong. You don't have to be a Christian to see that and understand that. But you do need to be a Christian to boldly proclaim the truth about Jesus Christ. And that's really what Metaxas is calling us to in our day. Who will speak for those who have no voice? Who will demonstrate bravery and courage to stand against these power brokers, government, media, big tech, big pharma? I mean, you look at the money and the influence and the power that has been brought together with corporate America too in the game, and you realize, wow, well, there's a formidable foe, and it takes real courage to stick your neck out. But again, I think maybe we can close with this. I think of the biblical example when Elijah tells his servant Gehazi's freaking out. Look at the armies that have come against us. And he says, no, you're not seeing the true armies. Lord, open his eyes and let him see who's on our side. And he saw all the hosts of heaven surrounding them. It takes people with spiritual eyesight to realize that with God, we have a majority. And all it takes is one courageous voice, one courageous pastor, one courageous, marketplace leader, one courageous doctor to ignite a revolution with the Lord, that can change culture. So God, give us courage and give us bravery and give us strength to stand in these times and to declare what is true no matter what arena, Lord, we're stepping into. In Jesus' name. All right. Well, hey, there's more fun next week, but these are 4 really good myths that we hope we've exposed, and encourage you, don't fall for the Romans 13 trick that enables you to hide in your house or hide in your church and keep going to Bible studies while you do nothing, while the culture around you putrefies. Yep. Don't fall for that. Get your voice, stand up, be a prophetic voice to those in power, and in the end, we'll see God show up and defend truth. He always does. All right, we love you all. Have a great week, and help spread this podcast far and wide. We know there's a lot of people that need to hear it. We'll see you next Thursday.